Bruce Wayne has mastered many disciplines already in his quest to become the Dark Knight, but will the mystic arts prove to be a stumbling block for him? Well, let's hop into the pages of Batman the Knight issue number 7 and find out together, shall we? Alrighty then, so as we join the book, Bruce has actually made his long-awaited return to the States, not to Gotham, but to New York City, a city that even Bruce himself admits is very similar to Gotham in many ways. Though, for the record, he actually thinks New York is a little bit nicer than Gotham. On the agenda this time is learning all the disciplines of magic, both the close-up kind, misdirection, and of course daring escapes from straitjackets underwater. Which you don't think would be all that useful, but then you remember that Batman's had to do something like that, I don't know, like 100 times in the last 80 years, so it certainly pays off dividends. For a change, too, the man who would be Batman didn't have to try that hard to seek out his teacher, Giovanni John Zatara, as it turns out he was actually quite the major celebrity magician in Gotham. In fact, he even knew Thomas and Martha Wayne. They were friends. Unfortunately, tragedy struck not only the Wayne family, but Zatara's own family. His wife died, he fled Gotham, and ever since then he's been living at the bottom of a bottle. Obviously, this is very sad, and Bruce feels even worse. Teaching Bruce has actually given Zatara a reason to get up in the morning and stay sober for at least half the day, and eventually he's going to discover that Bruce actually has no real intention of becoming a stage magician. He only wants to learn magic to further his own proto-Batman causes. Then, of course, there's Zatara's famous daughter, Zatanna. Apparently, her and Bruce were good friends growing up, and maybe had tragedy not struck in both their families, who knows what the relationship could look like now. Zatanna was Zatara's magical student, but after the death of her mother and her father's drinking, Zatanna has started pushing her father away more and more. She is certainly happy to have Bruce around, though, no doubt about that. Zatanna had tried reaching out to him after the death of the Waynes, but he never really called her back in all the years that he's been traveling around the world. It's while on a walkabout the two end up finding a dead woman, a bunch of crooks trying to rob her body. This wasn't some regular old slaying, though. This woman died via magical means. Ah yes, for you see, this isn't just a story about Bruce learning card tricks and stagecraft, it's a story about him realizing that magic, like real magic, actually exists. Demons too. In fact, there's a lesser demon that keeps trying to tempt Zatara to sell his soul. He won't do it, he's not that low down, not yet anyway. Obviously, when Bruce discovers there's a whole secret world of mysticism out there, he demands to be taught it. After all, if he wants to be a master of everything, that should also include the mystic arts. Here's the big problem though. Zatara says that he can't teach Bruce magic, that he's too old, and that magic requires something to be given up in exchange for the power. An equivalent exchange needs to be made. And the sad truth of it all is, despite everything that Bruce has done to try and better himself, he really has nothing to offer up except for darkness and his driven attitude. Hell, Zatara himself is such a shadow of his former self, he doesn't even want to go and try and track down these magical killings that are almost certainly tied to that demon who keeps trying to get him to forfeit his soul. Well, if the father won't do anything though, the daughter will. Zatanna vows to solve this magical case and brings Bruce along as an aide, which he's happy to do because after losing Anton as a friend in the previous issue, Bruce hasn't really opened his heart or his life to anyone else. In fact, I like this idea that Zdarsky is running with, that despite his dark, brooding nature, Bruce is ultimately a social animal and does need allies. Zatanna and Bruce eventually riddle out that this lesser demon they're dealing with feeds on people with broken hearts, which means that Bruce himself kinda makes for the perfect bait in this situation because, well, who's more heartbroken than him? Our heroes decide to set a sigil trap at Zatanna's apartment. Bruce gets a bunch of runes drawn on his body that will amplify all of his negative feelings, basically meaning that the demon is going to be attracted to him like a moth to the flame. Here's the problem though, instead of the demon coming to them, Bruce goes too far and ends up falling into the demon's domain. Yeah, that's right, Bruce visits hell for a little bit. Thankfully though, Zatara did teach Bruce quite a few tricks about escape, minding your surroundings, staying cool under pressure, and they're all things that he's able to use to try and bring the demon into the material plane. Unfortunately though, as Bruce and Zatanna quickly discover, despite their best efforts, they are still very in over their heads right now. This is a lesser demon, but it proves to be too powerful for the both of them. Luckily, help comes in the form of Zatara, who has seemingly not only kicked the bottle, but also put on his old stage clothes, which are basically just what his old costume looked like. Zatara banishes the demon back to hell, and in doing so, totally manages to get his groove back. It's not long after this event Bruce decides to take his leave. Him and Zatanna say their own teary goodbyes, again wondering the life that they could have had together had things gone differently. Bruce also has one last conversation with Zatara too before he leaves. Zatara figures that maybe the real reason Bruce wanted to learn magic was not to use it in what will become his new Batman crusade, but that maybe on some level what he really wanted to do was speak to his parents one last time, an idea that scares him because, well, if he puts out that sadness, that fire, he won't have the fuel he needs to continue his mission. Zatara says that while he may not have been able to teach Bruce any real magic, he does want to teach him a sort of magic that he has clung to in his darkest days, that being the magic of memory. For his wife, Bruce's parents are never truly gone so long as you remember them, so long as you share their stories, they will in a way live forever in your heart and mind. And so that was Batman the Knight issue number 7, everyone, and overall I thought this was probably the most straightforward in this series. Chip Zdarsky doesn't pull out a lot of flourishes or particular twists or tricks. It's just a straightforward Batman and Zatara story. It feels familiar, doesn't it? Which is not a bad thing at all to be. If anything, I think where this story really excels, though, is actually in the subtle subtext. Yes, this was a story about Batman trying to learn magic and ultimately not being able to do so, but in a way it is a story about Bruce having to learn how to deal with failure. That not everything is for him, and that he can be the best in the world at most things, but not everything. But that none of that also still doesn't mean that Bruce can't win at the end of the day. He might not have learned magic, but he was instrumental in helping Zatara get his groove back and kick the bottle. Again, showing that there's more than one way to be a hero, and that Batman doesn't need to punch his way out of every single problem that's brought before him. I also really wonder, now that we're basically in the home stretch of this book, where the story is going to go from here. We've seen Descartes, we've seen Zatara, we've seen some Ninja Master stuff. That's pretty much, the extent of Batman's training that we get to see in other stories. I don't know, will we get to see him maybe as an inventor, maybe see him screw around with science? That is a part of Batman that doesn't get explored near as much. All of this is, of course, building up to his big, no doubt teary reunion with Alfred. If I had to guess, the final issue will actually get to see Bruce try and become the Bruce Wayne socialite, putting together everything that he learned in the other 11 issues. Overall, I'd give this one an 8 out of 10. Still a really solid book, still one of my favorites every month when it comes out.
Hey there everyone, it's your old pal Cape Joel, and if you're seeing me right now, that means you watched to the end of the video, which I am very appreciative of. It really helps drive engagement and retention and all that other good YouTube stuff. So does liking and commenting. Wink wink. If you like my content too, you should check out my Patreon page. We just redid all the tiers, so there's a ton of great rewards. You can become a patron for as little as $1 a month, and well, it would just really help me out. It's never expected, but always appreciated. So until next time everyone, I've been Cape Joel, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.